People need to know about a species in order to act on behalf of that species and protect their habitat. Polar Bears International is uniquely poised to connect people to polar bears in the Arctic. The Tundra Connections program allows us to connect scientists with viewers around the globe. And the goal of outreach like this is to instill hope and inspire action in our viewers.
We have a mobile broadcast studio, and we reach out to classrooms all over the world to talk about polar bears in the western Hudson Bay. We have a couple different kinds of connections that we do out here. Sometimes it's live back and forth, and other times the live connection goes out and questions are chatted back for us to answer.
Will polar bears go extinct?
What can my class do to help protect sea ice?
Just the other day, we had a Skype chat with an entire school in Kiev, and we got to show them their very first polar bear, and when that comes up on the screen, it's really cool.
It's neat to maybe inspire the next generation of scientists. Seeing their faces light up when we show them videos and photos and talk about our research gives us motivation to keep going and keep doing what we're doing.
Join us as we stream live. You can view the broadcast on our website or watch live chats on social media. Tune in, ask questions, join our efforts to protect polar bears and the sea ice they depend on.
Welcome to our polar bear live chat. This is a nice informal opportunity to answer as many questions from you guys as we can. So if you're new to the broadcast, if this is the first time you're joining Tundra Connections, welcome. Thank you for tuning in. And of course, if you were coming back to us, you followed and watched maybe one of our virtual field trips or one of the Tundra Connections events that happened prior to this week, we're so happy that you continue to join us. And my name, by the way, is Kyle Schutt. I'm the partner on today's program with Discovery Education. We're so thankful to Polar Bears International and all of the sponsors that make this possible for us to be up here on this roving Tundra buggy. Buggy 1, it's called, just off the shores of the Hudson Bay. It is blistery cold and quite windy out there, but it's making for a gorgeous, gorgeous scene as you're taking a look at the polar bear cam right now. That was just off the front of the buggy, and hopefully we'll take a look out there from time to time. It's possible a bear may roam by, but that ice is forming quickly at these temperatures, so it's definitely packing and working its way further out. So before we just jump in and get started, I thought I'd let our panelists introduce themselves. You may know BJ very well, or maybe you don't, but BJ, why don't you start and then we'll come back to Steph.
Sure, I'm BJ Kirchhofer, and I'm the Director of Field Operations for Polar Bears International. I get to spend a lot of time in places where there are polar bears, which has been super fun, both here talking about polar bears and then in other places in the Arctic researching polar bears to find out what they do so we can learn a little bit more about how we can take care of them.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Stephanie Penk, and I am lucky enough to be up here to talk to you guys, but normally I am down in Toronto at the University of Toronto in Canada, and that's where I am doing my research project on polar bear energetics. So I look to try and determine how much energy polar bears are getting when they eat a meal and how much energy they're using when they're performing all the activities they need to do to stay alive and reproduce.
And what that means is that we have very informed people that can hopefully answer most of your questions, but it's possible, like we did yesterday, maybe we'll have to Google, see if they can Google, be the scientist to finding the answer.
Can we do that? Is that cheating for us? Can we Google?
I think it's okay, but let's see what we know first and what we can answer.
Sounds good.
Let's jump right in. We have some first graders. Hello, Newtown Elementary School. Miss Cunningham, it appears, is joining and bringing her students along. Thanks for coming along. And they would like to know two things. One, how many seals does a polar bear eat in an average season?
That's a good question.
Yeah, so if we're talking about the average on ice season, an adult polar bear wants to get about 43 seals in order to make sure that they have enough fat stored up on them to survive that onshore season when they're not able to hunt seals and they're relying on that fat stores.
And to give some perspective, you said the on-ice season. Can you just talk a little bit about what is the on-ice season as opposed to the off-ice season, and how long are those?
Yeah, so the on-ice season is what we're just about to start now. So when that Hudson Bay starts to freeze over again and our western Hudson Bay polar bear population is able to get back onto the ice and go find those seals. And so that ice every year freezes up and then breaks up when the temperatures start to increase again. And those freeze-ups and break-up timing of the ice determines just how long that onshore period is and that on-ice period is. And the freeze-up and break-up is determined directly by critical temperature levels, so really impacted by any changes to the Arctic temperature.
Random fact for you, polar bears need about 56 Snickers bars worth of calories every day in order to survive. So can you imagine eating 56 Snickers bars every day?
Wow.
Pretty sick.
You'd be pretty sick.
Not a healthy way to go through life for a human, but
no.
That's a lot of calories that they need.
It's a lot of calories.
Don't try that at home.
No.
Yeah, how about it? Well, the second question from Newtown Elementary School was, how do you put the trackers on bears like Ursula? Now, what I really love about that question is that you guys either watched earlier or perhaps you created your own virtual viewing party with the content that we shared ahead of time to learn about Ursula. If you have not done that, please go and take a look at these fascinating stories that the team at PBI has put together to learn about. So what do you think? Steph, it seems like a good one for you, but BJ, I know you have a lot of experience with trackers as well.
Yeah, I think this might be best for BJ.
Okay.
He's been pretty involved with trackers.
A little bit, yeah. So I was lucky enough to be able to go on a polar bear collaring expedition earlier this year. It's a pretty rare event, even for polar bear researchers. I think you'll find out through our chat here, there's a lot of different ways to get into polar bear research. You could be looking at the numbers side. You could be looking at, like Steph is looking at how they move. But to go on and actually go put collars on is pretty special. It's not very many people get to do that.
No.
So I got to go help put one tracker on a polar bear earlier this year. It was about 10 miles north of where we are right now. It happened in the month of May. And we actually go find the polar bears with a helicopter. And once we find them, we can sedate the polar bear with a dart. And once it's safely asleep, the scientists get on the ground and can take a range of measurements from how long it is, how big around the body is, how big its skull is. And then at the same time, we can put a collar or an ear tag transmitter on the polar bear so we can figure out where it spends its time, where it goes for the next year to 2 years.
Now, when we think about collars, they're pretty big devices. In fact, if we take a look at the skull here that's in front of us, you can see just how massive that is. One of our questions as we were preparing for the event, we happened to set the fur down, right? Nice polar bear fur, you can see it. But somebody happened to just kind of set it right down there on the skull, and it got our mind wondering, should the hairstyle be that way, or does that look better? What do you guys think? I don't know. Do you guys have a preference?
I think the students should chat it in.
Yeah.
Let us know.
Yeah.
Are we forward spike or are we back slick back?
Yeah, forward spike or reverse spike. That's what we want to know from you today.
Yeah.
And perhaps, now that we give him a hairdo, what's his name? It seems like he's coming to life a little bit. Do you have a name for our little friend here? We'll monitor Twitter and see what you come up with.
He needs one.
All right. So more questions coming in, and thank you so much. We have first graders joining with us. We have kindergartners joining with us. Very, very cool. South Lebanon, Ohio submitted a question. They said, we're very curious about other food types for polar bears. So are there other food types for polar bears?
Well, the main thing that polar bears are looking for is fat. So they're the only fully carnivorous bear species, but we often refer to them as lipivores. And what that means is lipid means fat. And so they're looking for anything with significant sources of fat. So if they're lucky enough to come across a whale carcass, they'll feast on that. Some populations, some subpopulations can try to get their claws on walrus, but it's pretty dangerous to try and take on a walrus. If you guys want to Google something neat, check out how big a walrus is in comparison to a polar bear. They can be pretty terrifying
huge
animals. Yeah. But yeah, they're looking for anything that has a fat source on it. And I think sometimes they've been seen actually trying to pull belugas out of the water as well.
Yeah,
sometimes.
not too far north of here. That's
Yeah.
been spotted. But I think that's pretty rare occurrence. It's not happening
Definitely.
everywhere.
No. Normally it's just an opportunistic meal. If a whale comes ashore, they're pretty much very specifically adapted to pull seals. If we can maybe take his hairdo off for a second here. But yeah, they have a really large skull, but it's still only large enough for a little seal head to fit in here. And that's what they're really adapted to grab and yank out of the water. Everything else is not quite as successful when they try to hunt other animals. Yeah.
I really like the food web graph.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see the names coming in.
I'm excited.
The food web graph there that our friend KT put up that you could just see, and it's coming up again here, just really talks to the entire marine food web and the ecosystem. Anything else that you wanted to add to that? I know you were talking specifically about the bears and what they eat, but they are dependent, even if they're not eating it directly, dependent on even things like those microorganisms.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole ecosystem is really kind of underneath the ice. Without the ice, it would be easy to say, oh, polar bears could maybe live on something else. Well, it's more than just the ice. It's everything that lives underneath the ice that makes the entire system work, as that graphic shows. So without the ice, you don't have the little squiggly diddlies, if you will, underneath. You don't have the fish. and you don't have the seals, and therefore you won't have polar bears.
Yeah. They may be at the top of the food chain, but you still need that rest of the food chain to be able to survive.
Absolutely. Okay, Redstone Elementary, thank you for joining. Time for your question. Miss Thomas looks like she submitted a question. Have you all seen polar bears take the same routes on the frozen ice year after year? That's an interesting one. Do they take the same routes? Is there any data on that?
Well, the thing is that ice is the Arctic sea ice, it never really freezes the same way twice. There may be particular patterns that it does follow, but a bear really doesn't see the same path twice. So there's certain routes that they have that they're committed to, but it's mostly on land. Once they're forced ashore, they kind of trek up the same pathways to get to this shore or to get to their denning sites. But yeah, it's a changing surface out there every year.
In places where they do come ashore, one of our colleagues was just in Wrangel Island, another place to Google. It's an island north of Russia, near Alaska, and there's pathways there from the beach on up to places where they could maybe look out, and they suspect that these pathways were maybe worn in by polar bears. There's not a whole lot else out there that would do that, so it's probably true.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting questions coming in, and by the way, that makes me think about tracking bears. If you haven't taken a look at Polar Bears International's website, really love the bear tracker. If you haven't taken advantage of that, where you can follow those different bears and see where they're going, and it's pretty fascinating. I like to adjust the timeline slider to see year over year or the previous years where the ice is formed and how the routes take there. So again, putting it back to you guys, because we want you to continue to learn. I think to truly be an ambassador of the Arctic and to take a stance, you need to take a little bit of initiative and learn on your own. We'll give you as many answers as we can, but we want you guys to continue to learn. So thank you. More questions coming in. Darvion, hope I'm saying that name properly, asks if polar bears get sick if they eat a sick seal. I guess would polar bears get sick if they eat a sick seal?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
I mean, there's different types of sickness, so I'm not sure if they're really suffering from the common cold, but we do know that they can get parasites when they eat infected seals. So they certainly do have that to contend with. And we don't really see too many sick polar bears, though. And I mean, it could just be that they're not making it back to where we catch them.
We do have another person on the buggy here who has looked at pollutants in polar bears. I don't know if Teo would want to jump in here. Does Teo want to jump in and talk about?
Yeah.
Sure.
I think it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
Come over here real quick, Teo. This will be fun. Here you go. You can just take this right here. Oh, it's on the other side. Yeah, here you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sit down. There you go.
All right. Hi. So, repeat the question.
If a polar bear eats a seal and it was a sick seal, would the polar bear get sick as well?
Right. Okay. So, the issue here is that there is a lot of pollution in the high Arctic. It comes from further down south, but it's transported north, and it's incorporated into the food chain.
How is it transported, real quick?
With the wind and with the ocean currents. And the thing is that a lot of these different contaminants, these different chemicals, they are what we call lipophilic. So they love being in the fatty tissue of any kind of organism, really. And as I'm sure you talked about, polar bears love to eat seals, but not just seals, but seal fat. So this is where you get a lot of these different contaminants, these chemicals. And so when the polar bear is eating all that yummy, yummy polar bear fat, it's also getting a lot of contaminants. And they can cause all sorts of trouble inside the polar bear. So a lot of organ damage. Some of these chemicals even make it into the brain of the bear.
Wow.
Yeah, they can have an effect on reproduction.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's not really the seal itself making the polar bear sick, but it's what humans produce that is then incorporated into the food web, ending up in the seal, and then ending up in the bear.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you for being willing to jump in.
No problem.
We have experts.
Thank
so
you.
Pop out of any corner. You never know when
The
jump
buggy's
in
not
to
that big, but we have people waiting in the wings.
That was great. Lots of comments coming in, some questions. So far, by the way, the hair, they all think it should face forward.
Yeah.
Just in case, you can't see. We'll face it back just for a minute so we can come up with our final decision by the end of the Q&A here, but most people thinking it should face forward. Mrs. Morin's joining us from Corner Lake Middle School, and all of her students. Thank you for coming to us today and bringing these questions. Interesting question here. It might be a trick question, but I'm going to go to you here, Steph. How long do polar bears sleep during hibernation?
That is a bit of a trick question. So polar bears don't actually hibernate. There's a distinction about what hibernation is versus sleeping. And what polar bears do is they just sleep. So they save a lot of energy by hunkering down and napping. And they can sleep upwards of 20 hours a day when they're, trying to conserve energy in the summertime. But yeah, no hibernation. Lots of bear naps, though.
And we saw that earlier. There were some questions about the polar bears being in caves, and I think they're referencing the imagery of the mom and the cubs coming out of the den. Can you speak a little bit to what a den is and why it could possibly be confused for a cave? But they don't hibernate. They don't typically find caves in this area. But can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, well, actually, I believe BJ was involved in a denning study. Were you not?
Yeah, we've worked on dens both in Alaska and in Norway. And it's true that some bears do go into snow caves, or in this place here in Churchill, they'll go into peat dens. But it's only the females, and it's only to give birth. So if you're a little male polar bear cub, the only time you'll ever really be in a snow den is when you're being nursed up to kind of healthy cub size, and when you emerge with your mother. So they're not really sleeping in there either. This is a time where mom is resting and nursing these cubs up from their birth weight up to something large enough where they can survive in the cold Arctic conditions. But yeah, that's probably where those images are coming from, is mom and cub coming out of the den.
Yeah, thank you. More questions here, and I like this one a lot because we had a glimpse of this just the other day. So this looks like Tim. Thank you for submitting the question. Tim wanted to know how tall a polar bear is when it's standing on its hind legs. And we had a glimpse of that as it was kind of up on the side of the Tundra buggy the other day. BJ?
It would almost be as tall as maybe Steph and I stacked on top of each other. Not quite, but pretty darn close. They are. I mean, how many fifth graders do you think that would be?
I would think at least 3. It depends on the average size, perhaps what the fifth grader's diet is.
Yeah, right, of course, yeah. But they could be maybe up to 10 feet tall from tip of their feet up to the tip of their nose if they're really stretched out. So they are a huge animal. On all fours, as they're walking around, the way we mostly see them, a large bear could be up to 5 feet at the shoulder. So that's pretty tall.
And that's why we're in these big Tundra buggies, these monster truck-sized tires. If you saw any of the imagery of the buggies themselves, they're taller than most fifth graders, just the wheels alone, right? So that we can be safe. And part of the reason we want to be safe is because, frankly, these bears haven't eaten in months, and that's why they are here. They're waiting to eat. And that goes to Miss Amanda's question from Grand Falls Royalty. Thank you for joining us, 7th and 8th grade students. They wanted to know, what is the bite force of a polar bear?
Ooh, that is a
Anybody
good
know
question.
that off the top of your head? I thought this might be a Google it, see who can figure it out first.
It might be a Google
Do you
question.
know?
I don't know the bite force, no. I mean, they got to have quite a bit of force because they're grabbing onto those seals, which, I mean, those seals can be upwards of 100 pounds, right? And they're yanking them up.
I do recall we were surprised that it wasn't as high as we thought it would be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
So we'll get that look. We'll look that up for you here quick.
Yeah, or if
It's a
any
very
of
good
you
question.
can find it and respond back and let us know, beat us to it.
There There we go. Lots of other questions coming in. Are polar bears harmful to people? Thank you for joining us, Parkview Elementary. We saw you on a little bit earlier. In fact, we had a question. Which Parkview Elementary, right?
I went to a Parkview Elementary back in Minnesota, so hello if this is Parkview Elementary,
That'd be pretty,
Minnesota. That would be pretty neat.
Pretty neat.
Yeah.
Maybe it is. Let us know where you're from, Parkview. But lots of questions. In fact, even the kindergarten class, I'm not quite sure, Miss Aldridge, what school district that is in your Twitter handle. However, thank you for all those questions. Where do they live? I think we've learned a lot about that, about how we're tracking them in this Arctic region. We can perhaps stipulate that they do not live in Antarctica, right? Polar bears are not in the South Pole. Polar bears are only in the North Pole. So I always like to bring that up. I like this question a lot. Why do polar bears slide on ice? Because, of course, most things slide on ice. Everything slides on ice, but not all the time. They're pretty good at not sliding on ice. Can you answer that a little bit?
Yeah, so their feet have these little bumps. They're feet pads, and I believe they're papillae, if I'm saying that correctly. And all that means is it's little tiny bumps, and so that's kind of like the tread on your shoes. So that helps them to really stick and grip to the ice while they're trying to get across it. And their feet are just massive. They're very wide. Some are larger than dinner plates, or the big males can even be as big as platters. So again, lots of surface area for those little bumps to grip on, and also helps act like a snowshoe, so it distributes their weight even better. So despite being so large, they're able to walk across pretty thin ice.
More questions coming in. I know BJ's doing some searching. We'll come back in a minute, see if you guys answered it first or if he does. This is pretty neat. We have a group of homeschooling students from Southampton, New York, Van in India, and Weston Jude, and they want to know how long can polar bears stay in the water?
Oh.
That's a really good question.
Yeah. So the longest swim we've tracked, and that was thanks to those radio callers, was about 9 days. And that female swam that whole time. Now, that's not a good thing, though, for bears. Even though they are good swimmers and they can do long-distance swims, that bear came out incredibly skinny. She lost a lot of her fat stores doing that, and she also lost her cub. So for younger bears or malnourished skinny bears, they can lose a lot of energy trying to stay warm in the water, because it's a lot harder for them to stay warm. And so they're good swimmers, but they don't want to be in the water.
Absolutely. More comments, more questions. Real quick, BJ, that was Parkview Elementary in Baton Rouge, so I don't think it was the same.
Well, hello to them, too.
But hello. We also have a class, Miss Neugen, if I'm saying that properly, Mrs. Neugen, in Allen, Texas. So thank you for joining us all the way from Texas. They wanted to know, how long do polar bears live? I think we talked about that briefly in the earlier episode or earlier virtual field trip, but in a zoo, that bear, what was the bear's name?
It was Debbie. Bear's name was Debbie, and it was in Winnipeg. Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Up to 40 years?
42 years.
42 years old.
So she was pretty old.
Good health care
Like I said,
plan.
yeah, good health care plan. She had a good meal plan.
Yeah.
She was well taken care of.
Yeah.
Bears in the wild.
Average, right?
Yeah, bears in the wild, they don't live quite that long. Into their 20s, especially males, they live a pretty rough life.
They do.
They have to fight pretty hard in order to have access to a female during breeding season. And this will shorten their lifespan. So the males don't live quite as long as the females, but the mid-20s would be about average.
Okay. Coming back around to the swimming question, we had fifth graders in Audubon. I would guess Audubon Elementary, but that's Redmond, Washington. So thank you. Jumping to the other part of the states. So I love how we're kind of bouncing around from state to state. Their question was, can polar bears see underwater? And do they catch seals while swimming in the water?
Okay, well, one of those is pretty easy to answer. Seal wins every time. If they're both in the water, fully in the water, seals are much more adapted for swimming than polar bears are. So polar bears might be good swimmers, but seals are amazing swimmers. So they're not going to have luck there. I don't see why they couldn't see underwater. They have not too much different. Oh wow, here we go. Who wore it best? Sorry, I got distracted there. Polar bears have pretty similar eyesight, not too different from you. A few differences in what colors they see. But you can see underwater, but you can't see the same or quite as well as you can on land. So I'd imagine it's something similar to that.
Now, if you're wondering why she was distracted, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd try a new
Who knows?
hairdo. I'm a little thin up top, if you can tell, and it's a little cold out here, so I thought maybe the polar bear fur would keep me warm, and it is, guys. It's
Is
nice
it helping
and warm.
out?
It's helping. Kind of insulates the top.
Yeah.
Should it be front for me, or a little reverse? How's that?
That's cool.
Backwards?
I think
is that
backwards
better?
is.
Backwards is better for me?
Yeah.
Maybe
It looks
let
very
us know,
streamlined.
We're still looking for your answers, guys, on our polar bear. Does he have a name? Should it be front? Should it be backwards? You let us know. Hopefully I'm making you laugh a little bit, because learning should be fun. Let's bounce around again. Here we have some questions from students in Orlando, Florida. So thank you to all of those students that are joining us. What are the predators of polar bears? I thought that was a fascinating question from Sabrina and Josh. Hi, guys.
So humans would be the only natural predator of polar bears. They're the top of the food chain, and there's no other animals out here that eat polar bears. Now, a male bear may go after a cub from time to time, or potentially females. It doesn't happen often, but it's possible.
And one other thing to note is, although grizzly bears aren't hunting polar bears, there have been some observations of grizzly bears chasing polar bears away from a food source, and it's kind of surprising because polar bears are typically larger than grizzlies, but those grizzly bears come in all charged up and angry, and the polar bears seem to just back off and let them have their way. So.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, I've been delaying here for a while, and BJ, I'm not going to give you the opportunity to answer. You might have looked up the question, but I'm on the side of the students, and
They found it.
We have a class here that's already answered, so we have
Perfect.
to go to
What did we find out?
Grand Falls Royalty. You guys win, because I saw it before he could say it, and it says, "We beat you." I like their pride, by the way.
Yeah.
We beat
You
you.
own it.
It's 1,200 pounds per square inch. Is that what you found?
That's about what I found.
Wow.
That's pretty strong,
That is pretty strong.
man.
Bonus points, 2,000 bonus points.
Congratulations.
We're not sure
Winner,
where you can
winner.
cash them in, but
But
congratulations, you earned them. We like to have a good time up here on the Tundra. Okay, a couple more questions that we're getting to here. I really like that we have some students in Maryland, in fact, in Baltimore, fourth graders. Hello. I was born in Baltimore, heading back that way tomorrow, flying into BWI. So not too far away from you, I'm sure. They'd like to know, why do polar bears fight, or are they playing? And I think they were referring to the clip that we just shared a minute ago, the two bears sparring. Can we speak to that?
Yeah, sure. So it can be. So there are some times when polar bears actually are fighting. Like BJ mentioned, those male bears have a pretty rough lifestyle. They need to fight in order to mate with females. They have to defend the female from other potential suitors. But that's not to say that polar bears don't play. So when there's not a competition, when it's not mating season, you'll often see full-grown males or maybe sub-adult males just practicing sparring, and they're not trying to hurt each other. And also there's some great video clips of moms play fighting with their cubs, and so they do interact quite a bit, and with no fighting intentions, yeah.
More questions here. What's the lifespan? We talked about that again a little bit. Average age, usually in the 20s, I think 22, something like that. It's fair?
Yeah.
Isn't that what you just said? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, maybe not like the average lifespan per se, but if a bear reaches adulthood, and they can live easily into the early 20s.
Okay,
Yeah.
easily. Thank you. That's why I love having scientists that can specifically correct my words. That's good to know. Here's a great question. I love this one. What is the most babies a polar bear has ever had that's, of course, been recorded? We don't know, but that we've observed or recorded.
Ooh, that is a good one.
So 3 has been observed and recorded quite a bit. Not anymore. That takes a real fat pregnant bear to produce 3 cubs. And there was this one instance where mom was caught on camera with 4 cubs, but I believe, if I have the story straight, she actually adopted one of those cubs, so she had 3 of her own, and there was an orphan cub, and this mom kind of let him tag along, which was pretty incredible. So, yeah.
It's a lot of mouths to feed.
I know. I'm not too sure. I'd like to follow up. It'd be cool to see how she did, but it's a lot of responsibility for a mama bear out there.
I think all the talk about the fur that was keeping my skull warm has piqued the interest. So let's shift to the actual fur of the polar bear. Is it clear? Can you describe it? What's going on?
So we've got a piece of fur here if you want to have a look. And this is part of what keeps a polar bear warm. And we can see here we've got some, it's kind of hard to see actually on the camera, but there's this soft downy layer underneath and then these longer guard hairs. And together that will help keep a polar bear nice and warm. The hairs are more or less clear, and it's the lack of color there that make them kind of look white, but they also will take on some of the colors in the environment. When we see them out here, especially against the pure white snow, they look almost a yellowish color oftentimes, and maybe you'll see that in the videos that KT's rolling.
Excellent. Well, we have only time for maybe one last question, and it's going to be a question to each of you, our panelists, and that is, what's the most important thing that you would tell the students that are so interested, they're having fun, they're learning with us and engaging, and we love that, but what's something that they can do that you think is important so that they can see not only the connection of this ecosystem to their homes, but then help polar bears and help the sea ice?
Go take the lead on this one.
Sure. So, you know, part of, if you tuned in earlier, my answer is going to be the same, because I think it's a pretty important answer. And that would be, you're taking the first steps right now. Being engaged and learning about polar bears, learning about climate change and what's happening to our planet is really the first step. And then talking to the people around you is the next step. So people do listen. Talk to your parents, talk to your family, and engage in conversation about these things that you're studying and you're learning. And you'll be surprised the changes that you can make.
Definitely. I mean, I think just as BJ said, that's the first step, to engage, to learn, to question things. And that will help you to continue to talk about your knowledge and what you're learning. And just remember that the world will be yours, and you have a right to voice what you think should be happening. And your parents and your grandparents and your family care about you, so you let them know what you think we should be doing to preserve the things that you care about in today's world. Yeah. And,
excellent. Excellent. And I would follow that up as well. I think I try to live by actions speak louder than words, and often what I find so invigorating is that we use a lot of words. We use a lot of language to describe what's happening up here throughout these programs, and the students there and the teachers, they share what they're learning, how they're learning. And so consider, as you're sharing, as you're reflecting, as you're writing down things that you learned throughout today's events, consider what kind of language are you using? Are you telling others what to do, or are you saying, I will do that? Because I think sometimes just that subtle shift of you should to I am can go a really long way, to I am doing this, and you're setting the example. And I think we need more independent leaders that are willing to say, stand up and take charge. So continue to be leaders, as we know you are, because you're joining us today. So that's a wrap. We're so excited that you joined us. Thank you, thank you, thank you from Buggy One. As I mentioned earlier, it's time to stand up, thaw out the feet, warm up, and drive the buggy a little bit. But we hope you have an excellent rest of your school day. Thank you for joining in the Tundra Connections. Thank you to all the sponsors that make this possible. Have an awesome day, everybody. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
People need to know about a species in order to act on behalf of that species and protect their habitat. Polar Bears International is uniquely poised to connect people to polar bears in the Arctic. The Tundra Connections program allows us to connect scientists with viewers around the globe. And the goal of outreach like this is to instill hope and inspire action in our viewers.
We have a mobile broadcast studio, and we reach out to classrooms all over the world to talk about polar bears in the Western Hudson Bay. We have a couple different kinds of connections that we do out here. Sometimes it's live back and forth, and other times the live connection goes out and questions are chatted back for us to answer.
Will polar bears go extinct?
What can my class do to help protect sea ice?
Just the other day, we had a Skype chat with an entire school in Kiev, and we got to show them their very first polar bear, and when that comes up on the screen, it's really cool.
It's neat to maybe inspire the next generation of scientists. Seeing their faces light up when we show them videos and photos and talk about our research gives us motivation to keep going and keep doing what we're doing.
Join us as we stream live. You can view the broadcasts on our website or watch live chats on social media. Tune in, ask questions, join efforts to protect polar bears and the sea ice they depend on.
People need to know about a species in order to act on behalf of that species and protect their habitat. Polar Bears International is uniquely poised to connect people to polar bears in the Arctic. The Tundra Connections program allows us to connect scientists with viewers around the globe. And the goal of outreach like this is to instill hope and inspire action in our viewers.
We have a mobile broadcast studio, and we reach out to classrooms all over the world to talk about polar bears in the Western Hudson Bay. We have a couple different kinds of connections that we do out here. Sometimes it's live back and forth, and other times the live connection goes out and questions are chatted back for us to answer.
Will polar bears go extinct?
What can my class do to help protect sea ice?
Just the other day, we had a Skype chat with an entire school in Kiev, and we got to show them their very first polar bear, and when that comes up on the screen, it's really cool.
It's neat to maybe inspire the next generation of scientists. Seeing their faces light up when we show them videos and photos and talk about our research gives us motivation to keep going and keep doing what we're doing.
Join us as we stream live. You can view the broadcasts on our website or watch live chats on social media. Tune in, ask questions, join our efforts to protect polar bears and the sea ice they depend on.